In this vid, I'm going to be reviewing a deck by ThePokeSpear. ThePokeSpear is running a Gengar variant deck, and Gengar decks try and win the game a little differently than your typical deck. Your average deck tries to win a game by taking 6 prizes by knocking out your Pokemon. A Gengar variant deck tries to put your Pokemon in the Lost Zone and then play the stadium Lost World to declare themselves a winner. It's a really interesting deck, but very difficult to run and get it to run right consistently. So let's take a closer look at the lineup. The starter in this deck is Smeargle. This is a risky starter because while you could possibly portrait a collector, you could also portrait a Juniper. Juniper would force you to throw your entire hand away, and while you might draw into something pretty good, you might also throw away something really critical. So it's a little bit risky, but then again, so are the baby Pokemon. Ideally, early game, you'll have a Slowking set up on the bench so that you can start rearranging the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. That allows you to put a Pokemon at the top of the deck so that you can throw it into the Lost Zone with Mime Jr. After Mime Jr. has been working on your opponent's deck for a little while, you'll pull up a Mew and use See Off to put a Gengar Prime in the Lost Zone. Once Gengar Prime is in the Lost Zone, you can start copying its attack Hurl into Darkness with Mew, and start taking a Pokemon from your opponent's hand and putting them in the Lost Zone. Just to make sure that they have a Pokemon in their hand, you use Mr. Mime's Trick Reveal to take a look, and if they don't have anything, you can always use Judge or Spiritomb Spooky Whirlpool to make them draw a new hand. Overall, I think this is a good line of Pokemon. However, Mew is very weak. With only 60 HP, your opponent is not going to have any problems knocking that out. So what I've seen is Mewgar decks that run a couple of Mew in order to get going with Gengar, but then do have enough Gengar in the deck to build up actual Gengars. 130 HP for the actual Gengar Prime is going to last a lot longer than the 60 HP of Mew. Unless you decide to build up real Gengar Primes with Haunters and Ghastlies, you can easily reduce the line of Gengar Prime that you run in this deck. You don't have any need for 4 Gengar Prime, since all you need to do is put 1 in the Lost Zone. Just in case 1 is prized though, I would recommend that you have at least 2 Gengar. The chances of 2 Gengar Prime being prized are very slim. I would recommend increasing your lines of Mr. Mime and Spiritomb to 2 each, because you never know when one of them is going to be prized. I think you can reduce your line of Smeargles down to 2. That way you won't have as many dead Smeargles in your hand late game. And throwing in a Tyrogue would also help you get the donks off of your opponent. You never know when you might be able to use them. You run an excellent line of trainers and supporters. Your deck relies on the Stadium Lost World that allows you to declare yourself the winner when your opponent has 6 or more Pokemon in the Lost Zone. Since you won't be taking prizes during this game, you run 4 twins so that you can always search out for any cards that you need. You run 4 Collector, which is great because everything that you need in this deck is a basic Pokemon. The only non-basic Pokemon is Gengar Prime, which you want to stay in the deck so that you can search for it with Mew's See Off and put it in the Lost Zone. You run the maxed out 4 Seeker, which is excellent. This will allow you to take up your opponent's Pokemon and then throw them in the Lost Zone. You run 3 Revive on this deck, which I might consider dropping down to 2, and throwing in a few Junk Arm, probably around 3 or so, in case you would like to reuse it. I would also recommend throwing in a Flower Shop Lady so that you can get some of those energies back, and so in case you have a Slowking in the discard pile that you need to pull out, you can reuse him as well. You run 2 Switch, which I like because you never know when Mime Jr. is going to stay asleep when you don't want it to. Again, this is where Junk Arm is going to come into play as well, because you'll be able to reuse those switches with it. Instead of the 3 Professor Oak's new theory, I would recommend that you use Judge. In case Mr. Mime sees that there's no Pokemon in your opponent's hand, and you're unable to play a Spiritomb, Judge could force them to shuffle in and hopefully draw into a Pokemon. The last trainers that you run in your deck are 4 Communication and 2 Dual Ball. I think the Communication is great, you never know when you're going to be able to reuse that, and while I'm not sure if you need 2 Dual Balls since you run 4 Collector, since all of your bench Pokemon are pretty much going to be basics anyways, it may not be a bad idea. If you can find room, the only other thing I would recommend adding would be Pokemon Reversal. Since you're going to be relying on manipulating your opponent's hand size and deck, Pokemon Reversal can be a great staller. If you can reversal off something useless, like an ability Emboar that has a very high retreat cost but isn't meant to attack, that can really stall your opponent for a little while you work on their hand. There is one more card that I think could be added, and that's Juniper. Just one Juniper, because I'm afraid any more than that you'll tear through too much of your deck and might deck yourself, but you never know when it might help you just get a really good hand. You might want to think about throwing in a couple of Rescue Energy, just so you can reutilize your Mews without revives, and you shouldn't need that many Psychic Energy in the deck. You could probably easily go down to 9 or 10, and still be able to pull it when you need it. Again, with Flower Shop in there, you can always reuse them as well. Those are all the suggestions I have for this deck. If you'd like your deck reviewed, just PM me the list and let me know whether you're interested in a blog review, which I can guarantee that I'll do within 2 to 3 days, or a video review, which I'm now having to select which ones I can get to and which ones I can't get to, and even the ones I can get to could be up to 2 weeks before they're actually published. Thank you for watching!